What about the Bible and race?
Race.
Wow. So the Bible, it's interesting what the Bible has to say about race is this. It doesn't say much about race. It says a lot about ethnicity. See, people, I think, recognize this. Race is a social construct, something that we created. And actually, what the word race was first used to differentiate between peoples of different cultures by those who wanted to own them as slaves. So they created humanity as a race, but then they broke it down into subhuman races, as it were, to justify slavery. The Bible doesn't speak about race, but it does speak about ethnicity and the value and the beauty of ethnicity. Now, you see this in various ways throughout the scriptures. So, for example, the Hebrews don't look much different than the people around them. In fact, when you look in the Middle East, most people, with some various variations, look kind of a lot alike.
Yeah.
A lot of the practices are the same. A lot of the customs are the same. The Bible isn't actually looking at people and judging them based on the color of their skin or the accent with which they speak or the foods that they eat. No, what you see God doing throughout the Old Testament is using people as instruments of judgment, regardless of their ethnicity, against other people, regardless of their ethnicity, because of the actions that they actually take. So, for example, the Hebrews and eventually the Israelites were used as instruments of judgment against the Canaanites, against the Amalekites, against the Philistines, everybody, not for their skin color, not because they lived in a certain geographical region, but because of their practices. And so it wasn't about their ethnicity. How do I know that? I know that because when Israel did the same exact things, when Israel engaged in idol worship, engaged in child sacrifice, engaged in temple prostitution, and all these kinds of things, God used the outside non-Israelite ethnicities as instruments of judgment against the Israelites. So the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Babylonians were used as instruments of judgment against Israel. In other words, what you see in a pattern in the scriptures is that God judges people based on the content of their character, not on the color of their skin.
Yeah.
Now that ought to sound terribly familiar.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Martin Luther King, the great civil rights leader, said was his dream for the future, where children would be judged not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. Dr. King did not pull that out of the sky. Well, it came from the Bible, so I guess he kind of pulled that out of the sky. But he saw a biblical precedent for that. And he urged us all not to look at ethnicity as the reason we judge someone, but the content of their character. But more than that, Josh, when you look at the ways in which Jesus interacted with non-Jews, he often made them the heroes of the story. He often made them the teachers of the people around him. I can think of countless stories, but John chapter 4 is a great example where Jesus encounters a woman at Jacob's well. And she's a Samaritan, and Samaritans and Jews have a years-long animosity. They have religious differences. They have geographical disputes. They have ethnic disputes, all kinds of disputes. Sounds like the Middle East conflict, actually. And he comes to this place where he speaks to this Samaritan woman, and she doesn't want to talk to him, and she's irritated about everything that he is as a Jew. And she expects him to be as irritated with her because she's Samaritan. And what Jesus basically says to her is, all this stuff you're worrying about, where to worship, whose land this is, what ethnicity is the right ethnicity, all this stuff, God is not seeking people to worship him on this mountain or in this temple. God is seeking people who worship him in spirit and in truth because God is spirit. And of course, God is truth. So what Jesus is doing in John chapter 4 with the Samaritan woman is teaching her that her ethnicity is neither a barrier to her inclusion in the family of God, nor is it a boulevard. It doesn't automatically get you there. Your ethnicity isn't what's important. What is important is that you worship him in spirit and in truth because God is spirit and truth. And what I find so fascinating here is that what Jesus is saying essentially is something important for all of us. Ethnicity is an important expression of who we are. It's not immaterial, it's important. It's an expression of who we are. But the image of God that each one of us has is the definition of what we are. There's a difference between who we are and what we are. Who we are is important, and the Bible recognizes that importance, but what we are is paramount and that is made in God's image. So ethnicity is a beautiful expression of the diversity that God gives to this world. He paints with a wonderful brush of mosaic, but he also allows us to understand that what makes us all equal is not the physical, it's the spiritual.
That's incredible.